Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where you can create the life you crave. With me, Dr. A, as a psychologist for over 30 years, a transformational life coach, and an expert in self-empowerment, my life's work has been inspired by the beautifully powerful resilience of the human spirit. We will share stories and successes of people who have not only overcome personal adversity, but have used their traumas and hardships courageously as a springboard into greatness. Create positive transformational shifts on your way to achieving phenomenal success. Get ready to level up as you move beyond the challenging terrain of your life's journey into the empowered living zone. Ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision, the Empowered Living Zone show starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. A, and you are listening to the Empowered Living Zone on Transformation Talk Radio. My guest today is Dr. Pat Baccili. Dr. Pat is an international award-winning talk radio host and the founder of Transformation Network and Transformation Talk Radio, and the CEO of owner of an Unlimited Possibilities Now, which is a successful inspirational company. Dr. Pat is well respected in her various roles in the human potential field, and she's received numerous awards for her empowering message. I am profoundly grateful and honored to have Dr. Pat join me today. Welcome, Dr. Pat.
I'm really excited about this. I'm excited about this show for a lot of reasons and what we're going to talk about here today, because I think we're going to be talking about, what do you call it? The triple A's that get completely misunderstood, sometimes misused, and most importantly, what I like to say is missed altogether. And so we're going to dive into this today because people don't understand what that means, what these mean on the pathway to empowerment, do they?
No, they do not. I'm really excited to talk about it, Dr. Pat. I'm really excited to talk about it because for me, authenticity is actually a very, very, very deeply held value. And it's been something important that I've held throughout my life. And in some ways, holding authenticity as a core value has been something that has been kind of my, my anchor or my, my landmark in the horizon that gives me some direction. And so it's been really important. So this has a personal meaning for me today. And it's interesting, you honed in on our topic today, the triple A. I thought about calling it the triple threat, but because of our conversations around the ego, I didn't think it was a good idea. So I might just misunderstand the connotation with the threat. But I do want to start before we dive into this. It's interesting. I often present things, if you've noticed, Dr. Pat, in triads. Like I will talk about three things at once, and even my whole concept of self-empowerment is a triad. And honestly, that's really purposeful, because when we think about what is the strongest, most sturdiest structure in the history of mankind when it comes to architecture, it is based on the triangle, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Base, right? And so this is not an accident when I present these concepts in triads, and today's no different. So we're gonna get into authenticity and talk about it, and we'll also talk about how it's part of a powerful triad. So if anybody's on social media, if anybody's on any of the platforms, professional platforms like LinkedIn, those kinds of things, watching anything on TikTok, you're seeing this term authenticity. It's really being tossed around a lot. It's becoming the buzzword. I call it the buzzword of the year. And Dr. Pat, it's more than just a buzzword. It really is a way of being in the world that I believe is really very powerful. It's gaining a lot of traction. It's getting a lot of steam. You can see it everywhere. You can see it in professional platforms. You can see it in any kind of social media, not just LinkedIn, but like I said, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all the different platforms, but people really know what it is. What is authenticity? And I want to unpack that today. So for me, authenticity is the quality of being genuine, being real, being true to one's personality, their values, their essence, regardless of any kind of external pressures or expectations. It involves a deep alignment with between one's inner self and outer actions. And so it creates or promotes this sense of what we call integrity. Integrity is another word for wholeness. And basically, wholeness is our inner being and our outer experience. There's a coherence to them. They go together. They work together, and that's basically what authenticity is. And why is it so important? Why is this becoming such a buzzword right now? And I believe it has a lot to do with what's going on in the current affairs of the U.S. I don't even have to say what's going on. We all know what's going on. There's lots of division. There's lots of people acting out. There's lots of loneliness and anxiety and depression. And I think what's happening is authenticity is grabbing, it's gaining traction. It's getting traction everywhere. Because I think what's really happening, Dr. Pat, is I think people are really yearning. And what are they yearning for? They're yearning for genuine connection. They want genuine connection. They're yearning for trust, to be able to trust each other. And they're yearning for integrity, for people to do and say what they mean. Yeah. And I think authenticity is really calling for that.
Yeah. In research, just to throw this out there, in research, most of us that do research or have done research at the, I don't know, academic level, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Even to this day, there are three things that are really important. It's called triangulation in research. And it has to do with the way you collect, interpret, and analyze data. It's literally, that's like a word. But here's the deal about it. They say that if you're going to do any project, it has to be trustworthy and credible. And in that strengthening, they say that if you do that, it strengthens the quality, authenticity, and trustworthiness. Now, that's the same in life. When you start to put words like authentic together, right? You know what I'm saying? If we would take these three A's and you start to put them together, you would be really hard pressed not to find the word trust or trustworthy shortly thereafter somewhere, right? Somehow, kind of like a thing. Somehow, when you're talking about it, it's attached to other things. And I think that's why you wanted to talk about these three things today. Because whether you approve of what goes on in the world or what you read in the news, you're going to believe people that otherwise wouldn't be believable, or believe situations that otherwise wouldn't be believable by the three things you're talking about today. And let's not make a judgment around the word authentic. Let's not make a judgment. Sometimes what we do with that, Dr. A, is we take a word like authentic and we put good and bad. No, there are people that have been leaders in the world, in history, that could write a book on authenticity, and they were the most awful people on the planet. But this is why we want to talk about it, because it isn't always just one word. It's a number of things. That's why I think you're bringing it up in this triad, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You bring up a really important point too, Dr. Pat, and that is, you said there are people that could write books on this, but, they themselves they're not embodying authenticity, right?
Look, there is a very, very obvious world leader that existed. And it doesn't matter what you find out about him, he will never be remembered for authenticity because of his horrific acts. But the notion of what this leader believed in, the notion of that killed lots of people. And the reason he was so believable was because there was such a profound belief that whatever the words that were mumbled out of his mouth or believed. And you see, this is the trick with understanding authenticity by itself. And that's why I think you're talking about them in this triad, because we also have to understand what each of these words means to us at a very personal level. And that's why this conversation is so important. You have to understand it. You know, when does something then become non-authentic?
Right.
What has to happen for you to be over here like, oh, I like see that. That's really authentic. Well, I'll tell you when the drug that you've been taking for 20 years gets recalled off the shelf, right? Then you start to not see the company that did that as authentically as you did. So today, I think what you're talking about today is really to help us all shine a light on authenticity is a buzzword right now. And yet, I wonder if we're kind of modifying that and redefining it to meet whatever needs we have at the moment. What do you think?
It's a great question. I think that a lot of times, we have these buzzwords that come up and we mold them like clay. And I think at the end of the day, you pull back all the different layers. I think there's a lot of factors going into this. And when you pull these factors back, when you look at each of these complexities, what you'll find is the bottom line. If you look at the core of what authenticity is, it's not going to change. And basically, the authenticity, at the core of authenticity is, are we acting, are we behaving in the way that is actually congruent?
Yeah.
What is in us, in our essence, in our true nature, in our true being. It's that simple. And there are a lot of things that happen, and especially in our world today. And, I want to go back to the whole thing around social media. What I think is often happening with social media is, even think about, now we question what is on social media. Is it real? That's often a question we get, right? We see people doing selfies. We see people talking about how wonderful their lives are. I remember my own experience of, seeing my friends posting on Facebook about how wonderful life was and how much they loved their partners, only to find out that 2 weeks later they were filing for divorce, And so there is so much inauthentic kinds of behaviors, images, campaigns, messages on social media, and we're inundated with it. And I think because of that, people are really yearning for something real, and I think it's twofold. One is none of us can live up to these representations on social media. First of all, we don't even know if it's real, and we can't live up to it. So what ends up happening? We start to struggle with feelings of inadequacy. We start to struggle with disillusionment because somehow we feel like we're behind the game, or we're under par. And I think authenticity is a beautiful anecdote to this, because what authenticity is about, in this realness, is it gives us permission to not be perfect. It gives us permission, authenticity. And I want to, I'm going to stop here for a moment, Dr. Pat, because I think this is really important. I remember this was a couple of months ago. I was in a coaching group, and it was interesting to see how, these are individuals that I would consider highly evolved and really value self-growth. And even they had a misunderstanding of authenticity. Authenticity is not putting your best foot forward. Authenticity is not being the best version of yourself. Authenticity is about being real. And sometimes in the moment, real could be, I'm terrified.
Yeah.
Authenticity can be, I made a big, horrible mistake and I feel horrible about it. Authenticity could be, I have no clue. Authenticity is about realness, about being real with yourself, being real with what you're experiencing, and not being swayed by what others are going to think about you. That is really what authenticity is about.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up. I know we're going to talk about this more throughout the show. And I really need to point what you said out because it takes courage to be that. It takes, look, I've talked about this before. When Sinead O'Connor, top of her career, got on Saturday Night Live because she had been physically abused by priests and nuns, and it was rampant. And you really hear about this now. Of course, we don't need to hear about it. It's already been exposed. But when she got on Saturday Night Live and tore up a picture of the Pope, she was done. Now, everybody wanted to walk it back. She said, no, this is me. This is my experience. So I want to be very clear about what we're talking about. There is a true nature to what you said. And that true nature takes a lot, giant shoes to walk in sometimes. It's not always easy. And, I made a comment to somebody the other day. I want to leave everybody with this before we go to break. How did I say it? I gotta try to get it. I gotta get a paraphrase right. Like they were talking about AI. I'm a big fan of AI in a lot of ways. I think AI in science and medicine, whatever. But I said, okay, AI now can represent the most unauthentic part of who you are. And the person was like, what are you saying, Baccili? What the heck? I said, no, wait a minute. With the swipe of your phone, you've changed your face. With another swipe, you've now changed the color of your shirt. With another swipe, oh, wait a minute, you're now at the beach. Which part of those 3 pictures is authentic for you? And, that was an interesting conversation because when you set this up, we're acting under the premise that we even have the opportunity anymore to be authentic and be okay. And I'm not sure we do. Because if we do, AI and the multi-billion-dollar industry it is creating to change everything about you would not be so successful today. And it really is. And we're just warming up there.
And Dr. Pat, there's a couple of things that you said that I want to grab onto. And
good.
They're going to seem very far apart. So I want to address both of those.
Do it.
I think it's great that you brought up Sinead O'Connor. And I have to tell you, I will tell you, I'm going to own this. Sinead O'Connor is one of my heroes. And I know that she created and was surrounded by a lot of controversy. And I know that she made a lot of people upset. And here's why she was my hero is because she was authentic.
Yeah, she was.
She stood up for what she believed at the core of her being. And not only did it take great courage, but she also had to withstand all that came after. And you're right. All of her managers and everybody, her publicists were saying, take it back, take it back, take it back. You've ruined your career. Take it back. And
you've ruined your life.
You've ruined your life. And she said, no, I will not. And that does take great courage. And what a gigantic gesture of authenticity. Now, let's look in contrast to what you're talking about with AI and social media in general. It is perpetuating, it's encouraging, it's making money off of inauthenticity. And it's interesting to look at those contrasts between Sinead O'Connor and just our trends today and what is coming up and what people are doing. And, people are struggling with this. They're really struggling with they're wanting to present themselves in such idealistic ways that it isn't even real. And what it's doing is it's paving this way for everybody to be inauthentic. And it does take great courage to be who you are.
It does. And I think that's what we're talking about today, and it's a journey. I want to be from where I sit. Authenticity is not an end game. It's not an end result. It really is a journey because I think you have to first understand who you are, what your desires are, what your expectations are. What is it that you're going to flow through you, on you, out of you? And it doesn't mean that we don't use discernment. I mean, this is really, really where people get confused between authenticity and truth telling. And it is confusing, but you have to know at the core of your being, when you're carving a bit of your soul away because it's not really you. When you're going out to dinner and eating a type of food that you hate, that's not something you wanted to do, right? These are some of the things we know. Look, I grew up in a corporate environment where we were one of the first companies to be introduced to EST training. AT&T was phenomenal for bringing everything new off the shelf to train everybody. And somehow I got to be the one clerk that got picked to go and do one of the first S development workshops on diversity. Now, it changed my life. And it had to be one of the most painful experiences. Now, EST has changed. EST has changed into the forum, into Landmark, into this. I mean, it's changed. Those type of trainings don't exist anymore. Why? Because they drove you to be as about authentic as you could ever possibly be, and to face yourself at that level of authenticity in a 7-day course without therapy, that was gonna be a nightmare, right? You can't go through 7 days of facing yourself, your prejudices, who you like, who you don't like, who you really are in 7 days, and then just go back to your job. All of us had to go to therapy after that. But what does it take for us to look in at ourselves and love ourselves and accept ourselves for however we see ourselves authentically? See, that's part of it. Not all of us are Sinead O'Connor's. We're not. There are parts of us that have done things that are Sinead O'Connor like. What we stood up for, how we fought back. Maybe it's an approach, whatever it is, what we did. Me not implementing a downsizing program that was going to fire a woman with 29 years, 11 months of service. And I don't know what happened to me in that moment, Dr. A. I don't. I was 6 months away from my own pension. I refused to do it. And I said to my boss, take my head count instead. I don't know what came over me. I don't know how you explain that, but there's something inside of each of us that may push us to a point, a tipping point, a point that Dr. Jean Houston talks about. That point is a point of no return, because when we get there, we get to face the true nature of who we are, and we get to love ourselves and feel the power in that. And we may have to navigate some waters, but I really want to ask you when we come back from break, what are the consequences if we don't do that? What if the consequences is every day of our life, we pull out an app and we screen swipe away our authenticity every day? What if we do that? What if we see a woman being beat by her husband and don't walk up and stop it? What is it? I don't have the answer. I hope you do when we come back from break.
Right. We were going to take a break, and when we get back, we'll continue our discussion of around authenticity. We'll be right back. Thank you. We are back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and Dr. Pat. And before we continue to unpack authenticity, I do want the listeners to know, if they are interested in working with me, or they want to know more about the Empowered Living Zone or Empowered Living or psychospiritual transformational life coaching, you can contact me through my website at www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. All right. Dr. Pat, before we took a break, you brought something up, and that was, do we know when we're not being authentic? And That's a great question, and I think it has a lot to do with how well you know yourself. Again, we're going to go right back to the literal core of my message, and that is always self-awareness, right? How much self-awareness we have. If we have even an ounce of self-awareness, we know when we are not acting incongruently. We know when we're pretending. And there are great costs, and we can talk about those a little bit later, the great costs of being inauthentic. But before we do that, I would like to talk more about, what goes into authenticity. I was talking about the triad. If we were to look at authenticity at the point, and we were to look at the cousins or the helpers, I see acceptance as one of those, and allowing as another. And, authenticity is interesting because it's not just a concept, it's not just a value, it is a practice. So it's something that is translated into a decision every single moment. So it's a practice. And when we think about acceptance and allowing, they are also practices. So if we think about a coin, we can think about the coin as authenticity, and on each side of that coin is acceptance and allowance. And these are really important parts of authenticity. Why is that? Yes, it takes a lot of courage to be authentic. And it begins with self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is fundamental to authenticity because it is the internal foundation of where we get our own personal confidence and self-worth. And if we have personal confidence and self-worth, it enables us to act true to ourselves. So it's really important to have self-acceptance, and it's important. So what's the difference I make a distinction between acceptance and allowing, and people are like, well, aren't those kind of the same thing? Yes and no. I see you shaking your head a little bit. I'm curious how you see those as different, Dr. Pat.
Well, first of all, let's just take the words by the very nature of them. Let's take the word acceptance. Mm-hmm. What does acceptance mean? Right?
Yeah.
Well, all right, take the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept what? Accept what? I'm going to accept that. I'm going to accept what? Right? I'm going to accept I'm going to accept those things which I cannot change. I'm going to accept it right there. I cannot change it. I'm going to accept that. Mm-hmm. 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 Doesn't mean I like it. Doesn't mean I don't have to do some work on it. Doesn't mean it doesn't get me all emotionally crazy and right? But that's what it means. I'm going to accept that at the moment. I'm going to take that in. I'm going to accept that for what it is. Right? Mm-hmm. So you're not agreeing, you're accepting something, right? This is the whole problem with forgiveness. This is the confusion around forgiveness to me. Somewhere somebody said to us, forgiveness means, oh, I forgive you. Yeah, you just murdered my dad. No, that's not what forgiveness means. Forgiveness, my friend, Reverend Dr. Bonnie Bernard, wrote a book on this, and she did a beautiful job. And what she said, which helped me do some healing, she said, forgiveness is not about that. Forgiveness is about letting go, but it's never about condoning. Mm-hmm. It's never about condoning. It's about accepting that which was, but it doesn't allow. You see, you can forgive by accepting a situation, but it doesn't mean you're allowing that thing to be okay. You're not. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And, these are part of the confusion when we throw words around. I think where we get really hung up is taking any of those words. For example, authenticity. And if you look at the synonyms for authenticity, let's just throw a few of these out right now. Genuineness, originality, legitimacy, validity, bona fide, right? Credibility, accurate. None of these things say truth, trust. They're not synonyms for that. Why don't we have truth as a synonym for authenticity? Because it's not, is it? So, by you talking about these three together, What you're giving people is, instead of a unidimensional idea of how to live, we're not unidimensional, we're multidimensional. And by bringing in the conversation acceptance, that means my best friend accepts me for what I am, every part of me, and I am nowhere even close to perfect, and neither has my life been that. But I'm there. I have a best friend. I could say I have a best friend. I'm not perfect. I work with all of you. I'm not perfect when I work with you. I make mistakes. Maybe I don't understand. Maybe I'm late with an email. But you're okay. You accept me for that. Why? Why is it? You know, talk about allowing for a minute if you could, because I think the key is right here.
Right, right. You know, when I think about, there is a distinction, and sometimes it's hard to define the distinction. We know it, but it's hard to find the right words for it, Dr. Pat. You know, when I think about acceptance, acceptance seems bigger. Like acceptance feels like it feels like the concept in the noun, right? We're accepting ourselves fully. We're accepting our flaws. We're accepting our true nature. We're allowing. We're giving ourselves permission to be who we are. We're allowing is like in the moment. You know, allowing. It's like allowing is the gateway to acceptance. I guess that's a best way to describe it, is that allowing is the gateway. It's the moment to moment. It's the verb. You know, I am allowing myself to feel what I genuinely feel right now, even if it's not popular, or even if it makes me uncomfortable,
That's
or
right.
even if it opens me up to humiliation or rejection. You know, I am allowing myself to experience what is genuinely here.
Yeah.
So I see allowing as a gateway, and acceptance is where we're going.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And in my brain, I have a little formula, and I wonder if this is true. Let's play with this. What if authenticity plus allowing equals acceptance? What if that's what it, folks, we're just putting this out there right now, right? We're just having a dialogue with you all. Try it on.
Or maybe it's
Authenticity.
bi-directional.
Or it could be, but try it on. Try it on. Allow authenticity plus allowing. So what does that mean? If I show up as truly me, Sinead O'Connor, if I show up as that, am I going to allow her authentic? Am I going to allow her pure authenticity? Am I going to allow that vulnerability? Is that going to be okay with me? Is it going to be okay with me to have the emotions around this? How about allowing growth? Am I going to allow? Because if you don't put those two together, you're not going to get acceptance, right? It can't happen. Authenticity is not enough. Being authentic is not enough for acceptability. Otherwise, we would have a whole lot of crazy people running the world right now, because a lot of folks in history, hundreds and thousands of years, showed up authentically. They showed up authentically. What did that mean? They believed in every minute of every day what they were doing. And it cost some seriously good, prominent people their lives. But you see, for us, we can't accept them. As authentic as they are, it's not going to get us to accept. We can say nobody was more authentic than Hitler. We could say that right now. And there are others. Or Churchill. We can talk about people that have come before, right? Sinead O'Connor. But what gets us to accept them, Dr. A? Isn't that the question, to really peeling back the onion on empowerment? See, our own version of empowerment has to get us to the place where we can make decisions. If you can't make a decision in your acceptance zone, then you're really not empowered. If you can't get to that place where, I don't know, do I accept that? Do I not accept that? You know, do I send my over easy eggs back because my yolk is broken? Do we do that? This is why this is a conversation, because in every aspect of our lives, in every minute of every day, we are faced with these three strange dynamics. And yet we don't understand them enough to know how they factor how we look at ourselves in the world. Do we?
We don't. And you're making me think about something as you're talking about this, Dr. Pat, and as you're sharing what you're sharing, it brings me back to, again, the same concept. This is an inside job. It's often an inside job. And isn't it ironic? If we look at our society today, the focus is so external. People have got, it's funny, you can just walk outside, go to a mall, people are on their phones, people are outwardly focused. And when in reality, our empowerment, our power comes from inside. Authenticity is an inside job. Acceptance is an inside job. Allowing is an inside job. And whatever is in is going to come without. And so you can't accept others if you don't accept yourself. What you don't allow in yourself, you're not going to allow in others. And so again, it always starts inside. And it's a very beautiful, dynamic dance or relationship with these three practices. These are just not words. They're just not concepts. They are actual practices. And they're of value. This isn't just fluff. I mean, research is actually showing, let's look at the professional world. Research is showing that when employees have leaders that show up authentically, morale is higher, cohesion is higher, innovation is higher, productivity is higher. So these are just not fluffy words. These words actually have positive outcomes. Mental health is better. Stress reduction is better. So there's actual outcomes that support the value of authenticity and the value of the allowing and acceptance that really bolsters and fosters and enables authenticity. So these are really important practices in our life.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. And I love that you brought that up about leadership. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm very close to a global airline company here. I did my postdoctorate research with their union. And so everything you read in my documentation, especially around leadership, it's very clear. And one of the things you mentioned is that authenticity is one component in my research where I literally defined integrity. Up to this point, nobody had defined integrity in a study. There was only one book written on integrity. When I did my research, I was shocked. One book. I'm like, what? Mm-hmm. And it was fascinating to discover that part of the equation we're talking about now has to do with authenticity. And the way it gets defined in a lot of people's minds is the very nature and a component. And it's like, Dr. A, if you say you're going to do something, do you do it? If you say you are something, are you it?
Absolutely.
I mean, this is what we're talking about, right? And this is why authenticity is so tricky and so misused right now, because it's being redefined, just the way narcissism was redefined. And it's being redefined because if you use the really good AI program that puts up something really, really cool and people believe you, you just got bumped up on a believability scale. But it's not enough. It's not enough to hold the very values you're talking about of allowing and accepting, because those values that you're talking about have to do with what we think about when we say the word integrity. And see, this is why this conversation is so important, right? Yeah. I'm not going to accept blah, 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 blah if I don't see some of these other things happening. I'm not going to see it. I'm not going to understand it. I'm not going to accept a level of authenticity from a people, person, or thing if I don't see them accepting it?
Right, right. Well,
This
and
is why this is important to talk about it. I think you and I are going to have more questions than we have answers at the end of the show. But wouldn't you agree that this has got to be talked about more?
absolutely. I think what's coming up for me, Dr. Pat, as you're sharing what you're sharing is, really what's at the core of this? It's trust. It's
There's no
really
question about it.
it's trust, and we're at a place in our world, in our society, where we are really lacking trust, and I think we're suffering as a result. I think that's why anxiety's up, depression is up. I think that's why we have so much divisiveness in the world and so much road rage, and the me versus you mentalities, because our sense of trust has really degraded. And authenticity is a beautiful anecdote. It's a powerful anecdote to this, because this is really what it's addressing. It's, can I trust you to act as how you truly are? Can I really trust in that? And when I can trust on that, what happens is it not only lets your guard down, but it also gives you permission to show up exactly as you are. So I think that's really important when you think about authenticity. When we act in authentic ways, when we accept ourselves, when we allow our genuine experiences, by doing that, we're modeling it for others. We're giving others permission. We're also helping bolster courage to act in congruent ways. So I think that this is definitely a very powerful practice that I think has a lot of payoff. A lot of payoff. Yeah. I know we need to take a quick break. When we get back, I know you asked this earlier in the show, Dr. Pat, is how do we know when we're in an authentic place? Like what is the experience like, and how do we know we're there? And so when we get back, we're going to talk about the pillars. Like, what are the pillars of authenticity? So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. We're back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, and Dr. Pat. And we're going to go right into, how do we know? Like, how do we know, or what are the things that we do in order to come from this place of authenticity? And you're gonna hear this over and over and over again with me, Dr. Pat. It always, 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 always starts with self-awareness. Self-awareness is the cornerstone of a lot of things, including authenticity. And let me tell you in a little bit more detail why self-awareness is so important. If we don't know ourselves, how can we act in authentic ways? We have to deeply understand our own values, our beliefs, our strengths, our weaknesses, our emotions, motivations, and desires. We have to have an understanding of that. And again, the prerequisite is acceptance. We've got to be able to accept and allow whatever our experience is. And part of authenticity then involves regular introspection. We've got to keep looking at ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to have that awareness. And, when we have that honesty and awareness within ourselves, and we really understand who we are, then it allows us to act consistently or congruently to our true nature. So that's really important. We've already talked about self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is also a very important pillar of authenticity. Also important, and you actually spoke to this earlier today, is we know that we're being authentic when we are being honest and we are being transparent in our communication. We are communicating openly, we're communicating sincerely, even when it is difficult. So I know that we've bared witness and experienced when leaders have taken personal responsibility for mistakes they make. We are all human. None of us are perfect. We are going to make mistakes. And it's important to own those. It's important to be honest about our journey. It's important to be honest about our own struggles, because what that does is it makes us human and it makes us relatable. And when we're relatable, then people can trust us. And also, and again, I think this is a whole show on its own, Dr. Pat. You already brought it up, integrity,
Yeah.
and just like authenticity, people really misunderstand what integrity is. What is integrity? Integrity is about congruence. Integrity is about acting in ways that are congruent with our values and our beliefs and our true nature. So this is important because courage is at the center of this, having the courage to act and show up in congruent ways. So courage is a really important pillar of authenticity. If we don't have courage, then we don't have the strength to be able to stand up for what we believe in, just like Sinead O'Connor. There's the other side of this, though, and these are, I call these more gentle, kind of compassionate kinds of, it's being vulnerable, being, showing the fears, showing the imperfections. It's also about empathy. It's about, having empathy, not only for ourselves, but for others, and being open to feedback, But again, at the core of all of this, it's important to be mindful. It's important to be aware. It's important to be able to look at ourselves honestly and be willing to hear what others have to say.
And I want to add something else. If we don't have this conversation, we'll have it next time. There are going to be times in your life where you can't be who you are. How do we know that? Anne Frank. You see, we have to look at this in multiple ways and layers that matches our own personal journey. There are some things in life that you will not admit to. You will not know or admit that level of authenticity to the outside world. However, we need to separate authenticity as a self journey. Anne Frank knew she was Jewish, knew it, but also knew that if she paraded up and down the street, it would not end up well. And so this is the conversation that we'll have as we carry forward, because there are just some things that we struggle with every day. And that's why I want to say authenticity has many layers to it. And I think that's important. I think people could hear it in our conversation today. And I'm not going to say to anybody out there to become Sinead O'Connor. I don't know you. I don't know what you're capable of handling. You have to decide for you who you are on the inside. But what you decide to do in the outside world, that's another journey. And I want to be clear to people, because the LGBTQAI community has struggled to be who they are in multiple societies that would have them killed for being that. And that's why this has got to be a personal journey, as you talked about earlier. It is a personal journey for people.
Yes, yes. And it also brings up, and perhaps this will be another podcast episode, what it brings to the table, Dr. Pat, is discernment.
Totally.
Discernment is so important because, there may be ways in which we know who we are, and we also have to discern wisely what makes sense in terms of what we put out into the world.
Yeah. That's why I think the cap that we put on this bottle is that authenticity is not just a word. It is a life journey. It's a process. It's multidimensional. It's body, mind, spirit, intelligence, emotion. It's all of who we are. And each of you has to decide for yourself how you're going to enact that in life. And to the degree by which you enact it has you feel empowered. Isn't that the Empowered Living Show?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Pat. Okay. All right. Before we end today, if you are curious about empowered living or psychospiritual transformational life coaching, or you would like to work with me, you may contact me through my website, www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Again, www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. Stay tuned for the next podcast of the Empowered Living Zone. Join us every first and third Tuesdays of every month at 12 p.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great week, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Empowered Living Zone show with me, Dr. A, to create the life you crave. Tune in on the first and third Tuesdays at noon Pacific time on transformationtalkradio.com and get ready for another show. Say yes to creating positive and empowering change in your life and move beyond life's challenging terrain into the zone of success. Be ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision in the Empowered Living Zone. For more information on how to do deep transformational work with me and to create the life you crave, visit empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's empoweredlivingcoaching.com. See you next time.